We have 138 signed up, 24 in the waiting room. I don't know what's been going on with our attendance. Maybe they'll filter in.
Yeah, they will. It'll be fine.
Here we go. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Care Concierge with CarePatrol, where education is the heart of everything that we do. CarePatrol is an aging care navigation firm, and we educate, advocate, and guide our clients towards the right decisions in their healthcare journey. And we do so at no charge. We're paid by providers who are private pay providers like assisted livings who pay our fees. And the thing that we enjoy most about what we do is education. So we created the CEU series about 2 years ago and have welcomed many wonderful guests and have another today that I'm pleased to introduce to you in just a moment. Let me give you some housekeeping ideas. At first, if you're new to us, then we are accredited by the Alabama Boards of Nursing and also by the Alabama Board of Social Work to provide 1.0 contact hour for today's teaching. In order to receive credit for this course, you must do the evaluation, which is password protected. I have placed the evaluation link into the chat room for you, and I know that some of you like to participate by phone or are otherwise not able to see the screen. Let me read for you now the link to the evaluation, which again is password protected. And by doing this password protection, the Alabama Board of Social Work will allow this hour to be a classroom hour versus a recorded credit hour. And so make note of that, you social workers who are new to us. Nurses will be posting your hours onto the ABN website within the week. For you, everyone who does the evaluation receives credit for the hour, receives a certificate rather. We are happy to do this for you. That link sends you to Zoom. It sure does. You're right, Mr. Dozier. Let me come up here and put in the right link. I thought that was awfully long. I'm so glad that you all keep me on target because I can get off target, as our speaker knows. So our evaluation link today, which is password protected, and thanks to Mr. Dozier, it's correctly in the chat room now for you. The link is https://www.surveymonkey.com/r/ all uppercase letters, L, B as in boy, 9, L, 5, 7. And those of you who've been with us know that we give the password out at the end of today's instruction, but that is the link. We do encourage discussion, and I hope you'll use the chat room to interact with our speaker today. If you're not familiar with Zoom or the chat room, take your mouse and move it up to the top of the screen or down to the bottom. A black bar will appear. On that bar is the word chat. Click it, and please join our conversation. I know that Dr. Elmore, our speaker, and I both feel that we're enriched when you add your experience to ours and that our audience is enriched. The last is a number 7, not a letter Z, Mrs. Wright. And with no further ado, I'll introduce our speaker. If you were in the waiting room earlier, you may have seen her bio, which I listed there. She's an accomplished pharmacist and speaker and educator, entrepreneur, and author of several books. And she's currently working on yet another degree, which is law, in order to take her activism and her opinions to even greater heights. So I welcome Dr. Lindsey Elmore, who will discuss with us today meds for diabetes. Dr. Elmore?
Hey there. I'm so excited to be here today. And I just want to echo what Sean said. Please be active in the chat. This makes it more fun for me when you have questions and I'm able to answer them, and I actually know where I'm adding value and what you actually need to make the best of your work. So everybody, give me a little bit of information in the chat right now. Why are you tuning in today? What are you hoping to learn? What are current challenges that you have in your current practice of taking care of patients with diabetes? I don't only want to talk about meds today. I also want to talk about the history of med pricing within diabetes, because there is some very interesting history of how meds got priced the way that they are. And we also are able to talk about how we can optimize pricing of the medications that patients are using. And so I am very excited to talk to you. So my background, so I am a pharmacist. I have a degree in chemistry. And about 10 years ago, I really took a hard left turn out of conventional Western modern medicine and really started to learn more about alternative medicines, and most recently have been learning about functional medicine. And functional medicine has a completely different approach to healthcare versus Western medicine. So Western medicine tends to look at diabetes as like, oh, well, here we've arrived. Functional medicine takes the approach of like, okay, we can prevent diabetes from happening years and years and years in advance of actually getting the diabetes. You know, most Western medicine, we like to use the analogy of, if you have a faucet and a sink that's overflowing, Western medicine tends to try to mop up all the water on the floor. Functional medicine turns off the faucet, right? So we have to turn off the faucet. So I have type 2 diabetes. I am diabetic. Continuing education for our patients. It does take continuous education, that is for sure. Diabetes is so prevalent. It is. But diabetes is totally preventable as well. Diabetes is not an inevitable destination where everybody in America arrives, right? That is not where we have to be. So let's first just talk about what is diabetes, what are the symptoms, what causes it, what are the different types of diabetes, etc. So what are the symptoms of diabetes? All right. So when you think about diabetes, I want you to think about increased thirst and increased urination. Those are the absolute classic symptoms. Increased hunger can also be a symptom of diabetes. Blurred vision. Advanced diabetes can also have numbness or tingling in the feet and the hands, sores that don't heal, and unexplained weight loss. All right. So when you do not have enough, okay, so when either you don't have insulin from having type 1 diabetes, or if you have lost your sensitivity to insulin, insulin is not able to push carbohydrates into your cells, which is what gives that unexplained weight loss. And so people get mad at me on social media when I talk about medications that cause weight gain. But one of the most classic medications that causes weight gain is insulin. That is literally the way that it works, is to help your cells uptake sugar, okay? So if you're just losing weight left and right, peeing too much, drinking too much water, that can be a sign of diabetes. Looking to learn more about long-acting and short-acting medicines? Great. Diabetes, kidney failures appears with several senior adults. Yes. So cardiometabolic disease is the number one disease in all of America, and it makes you more susceptible to every other disease. You know, we look at COVID. Why did the United States have 65% of the deaths related to COVID? It's because we are all, in general, unhealthy. According to the University of North Carolina, a study came out maybe a year ago at this point. Upwards of 90% of Americans have at least one marker of cardiometabolic disease. And cardiometabolic disease increases inflammation. And when you are inflamed at baseline, you are more susceptible to all kinds of inflammatory conditions and infections, okay? I'm interested in understanding symptoms of diabetes and how they can be reversed. Okay, cool. Well, now we've covered the symptoms of diabetes. We know that type 1 diabetes, you see symptoms in a matter of weeks in general, right? And it's not just like genetics that cause diabetes, right? Type 1 diabetes. You can also be exposed to medications that can increase the risk of diabetes. Also, when people have pancreatic problems, which is the source of all the insulin in our bodies, that also can cause diabetes. And there's also medicines like streptozocin that are outright used to cause diabetes. We don't use streptozocin in humans anymore because it literally has a 100% chance of causing diabetes, okay? So people with type 2 diabetes, those symptoms happen very, very slowly over the course of years. And they can be so mild that you don't even notice that they're happening. You may have no symptoms at all. And most people don't know that they have diabetes related health problems until it's too late, okay? So type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes are two very distinctly different conditions. Type 1 is an autoimmune condition where your body attacks your beta cells in the pancreas. It's typically caused by genes. It also can be caused by, as I mentioned, meds. It also can be caused by viral infections that can attack the pancreas, okay? In general, type 1 diabetes is a lifelong condition. There are some Chinese medicine textbooks that say that you can reverse it. I have never seen a case of type 1 diabetes get reversed in my entire career. Type 1 diabetes is typically an insulin for life kind of condition. You don't use any of the oral medications to treat type 1 diabetes, all right? Type 2 diabetes is by far the most common form of diabetes. It used to be called adult onset diabetes, and type 1 was childhood onset diabetes. Unfortunately, our diets in the United States have gotten so bad that type 2 diabetes occurs in children as well. So the most common cause of type 2 diabetes is being overweight, being obese, and not being physically active, all right? So muscles are a reservoir for our sugars in our bodies. If you have this great reservoir for your sugars to be able to get into the muscles, that is what keeps it from setting up as fat in the body, as well as setting up as fat in the liver. So you're more likely to develop type 2 diabetes if you are not physically active, if you are overweight, or if you are obese. Extra weight causes insulin resistance, and insulin resistance is very common in people with type 2 diabetes. The location of the body fat makes a huge difference. Extra belly fat around the midsection is highly linked to type 2 diabetes, as well as heart and blood vessel disease. And so a lot of people use the body mass index. Body mass index is a little bit antiquated at this point, but if you have central adiposity, so extra weight around the midsection, that is a huge red flag for the new onset diabetes. Insulin resistance is one of the root causes of type 2 diabetes, all right? So if you've heard me teach before, you may have heard me teach that there's a hierarchy of hormones in the body, right? And so a lot of people complain about estrogen, testosterone, progesterone problems, but up under that is a thyroid problem, and up under that is typically either an insulin or a cortisol problem or both. Cortisol, the stress hormone, can actually drive you towards insulin resistance. Okay. It can drive you towards the insulin resistance. And so be aware that if people are chronically stressed, it's going to make their insulin resistance worse. And so insulin resistance is a condition of the muscles, of the liver. It is also a byproduct of when fat cells don't use insulin well, when they're not able to take it up and process it well. So as a result, when you have too high a glucose for too long, your body makes more insulin to help glucose get pushed into the cells, right? And so at first, the pancreas just keeps cranking out more insulin. This is bad, right? Because hyperinsulinemia is what is causing the diabetes, right? So we have all these meds out there that increase insulin output, that cause us to make more and more insulin. And it sucks because all they're actually doing is making the disease process worse. It's making the disease process worse. So when your body has to make more and more and more insulin, blood glucose levels tend to rise. There are racial and ethnic groups that are more likely to develop type 2 diabetes. Part of it is because they were more indigenous cultures that had a traditional diet. And with the introduction of the standard American diet, it made people sicker. And so like Alaskan natives, American natives, Asian Americans that have come from a very traditional Asian diet, which tends to be lower in meat. It tends to be closer to the earth. When they come to the United States, it's terrible. Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians and Samoans, who tend to be heavier just as a population than a traditional Asian population, et cetera, can have a higher risk of diabetes. And African Americans also have a higher risk of diabetes. We also have to look at gestational diabetes. So gestational diabetes is diabetes that develops during pregnancy. And we use that terrible syrup to test if women have diabetes during pregnancy. And so what happens during gestation is that hormones that are produced by the placenta contribute to insulin resistance, which makes women in pregnancy more likely to have diabetes. As with type 2 diabetes, there's weight gain associated with gestational diabetes, and women who are overweight or have obesity may already have insulin resistance when they become pregnant, and then when they put on weight during pregnancy can throw them into full-blown gestational diabetes, which may last even after the pregnancy happens. Genes also play a role in diabetes. In functional medicine, we talk about how 95% of disease is lifestyle and environment driven, and about 5% of disease is driven by our genes. And so genetic mutations can cause diabetes. So there's monogenic diabetes, which is a mutation in one single gene, which is usually passed very strongly through families. Sometimes the gene can mutate on its own, but it's uncommon. And most of these gene mutations are causing the pancreas to be less able to make insulin. The most common type of monogenic diabetes is neonatal, or what's called MODY, maturity onset diabetes of the young. And neonatal diabetes, typically you see it within the first 6 months of life. And MODY tends to happen during adolescence and early adulthood. We also know that cystic fibrosis can cause scarring of the pancreas, and this pancreatic scarring can inhibit it from making enough insulin. And then hemochromatosis causes the body to store too much iron. And if it's not treated, the iron buildup can damage the pancreas and other organs. Hormonal diseases are also very highly related to diabetes, okay? So Cushing's disease, where you have too much cortisol in the body, can outright lead to diabetes, as can chronic steroids. And under normal circumstances, cortisol helps to counterbalance the actions of insulin. However, if there is too much cortisol on board, cortisol levels get elevated and can increase insulin resistance, okay? So in general, be on the lookout if you have a patient that has been on a steroid medication for perhaps an autoimmune condition or a long-standing asthma. It's going to ultimately lead to diabetes at some point. And Cushing's is nothing to sneeze at, right? Cushing's can be very, very life-threatening. But what we typically see is just chronically high cortisol over the course of years. We also have acromegaly, rare condition, but does happen. This is where the body produces too much growth hormone, and growth hormone can lead to insulin resistance. This is also important for people who are doping growth hormone for athletic performance or whatever. Growth hormone does have some benefits, and it has been researched for some of those benefits, but if you have too much, it's going to cause problems eventually. We also know that hyperthyroidism can run the risk of causing insulin resistance. Hypothyroidism causes the risk of weight gain. So any type of thyroid imbalance can worsen insulin resistance. Cortisol also worsens our thyroid metabolism. Cortisol, when it is too high, drives, instead of driving T4, which is your less active form of thyroid hormone, into T3, which is your more active version of thyroid hormone, it causes a shift from T4 to reverse T3. And reverse T3 is not as active. It doesn't activate the thyroid receptor as T4 or T3 does. Okay, so any type of thyroid imbalance, we need to look out and screen for our hormone and insulin resistance. Damage, removal to the pancreas, pancreatic cancer, rupture of the pancreas, anything that harms the beta cells and makes the pancreas not as functional is going to result in diabetes. And if you ever have to have, a pancreatic, if you have to remove a portion of the pancreas, diabetes can occur because of the loss of beta cells. There are also a lot of medicines that cause diabetes because they harm the beta cells, disrupt the way that it works. We've already mentioned the glucocorticoids, which are used to treat any type of autoimmune condition, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, ulcerative colitis. It also is used a lot in asthma. So be on the lookout for that. Any type of organ transplant medications, some of those can cause diabetes. Niacin, vitamin B3 has also been related to disrupting beta cell function. So be aware of that. Some of the most common diuretic medicines, the thiazides, are related to diabetes. Anti-seizure medications, the psychiatric medications can cause, especially your atypical antipsychotics. I mean, you think of a drug like clozapine, you're talking a drug that can put 20 pounds on you in the first year. The psychiatry medicines like the antidepressant medications. Be sure that you're looking for your patients on a spectrum. So with the atypical antipsychotics, as well as the antidepressant medicines, there is a spectrum of which medications cause more weight gain than others. So with the atypical antipsychotics, clozapine is going to be probably your worst, 20, 30, 40 pounds as a result of taking that medication. We see medications that cause less weight gain, things like quetiapine, risperidone, cause less weight gain, but they still cause weight gain. For the antidepressants, your worst SSRI is probably paroxetine or Paxil. Fluoxetine, Prozac is going to be somewhere in the middle. And then your SNRIs, like your venlafaxines, the ones that also hit norepinephrine, those are the ones that actually can cause some weight loss, but they cause increases in blood pressure. So it's always a trade-off when it comes to picking and selecting a correct medication, right? But the psychiatric drugs, there's so many that cause diabetes. Some of the HIV medications can also lead to insulin resistance. And so we just have to be on the lookout whenever we are using these medications. Infuriatingly, statins cause diabetes, right? So we're using statins to treat hypercholesterolemia. Statins are in the diabetes guidelines, and statins cause insulin resistance. It's absolutely infuriating. They increase the risk of diabetes. People say that they still can protect you from heart attack and stroke. The Ascot trial, if you stratify men versus women in that trial, women who got atorvastatin were no less likely to die, and women who got atorvastatin versus placebo were more likely to have a heart attack when the statin medications are used for primary prevention. Primary prevention of the use of statins it's not a thing in women, and we need to get away from it. It's a long-standing political problem where people who have strong ties to the drug companies that produce statin medications were sitting on the boards and writing the guidelines. In the 2013 hypercholesterolemia guidelines, 8 of the 15 panel members had direct connection to the manufacturers of statins. And so we have to get the political influence out of our prescribing patterns and out of writing the guidelines. Diabetes guidelines, I actually like the fact that the diabetes guidelines, they come out once a year, every year in January, much, much better than like the JNC hypertension guidelines. And they're even more up to date than the cholesterol guidelines. The hypertension guidelines are tough because nobody can agree on what is an appropriate blood pressure and how do we treat it in different people. So, you know, I'm sure I single-handedly am not going to change the entire prescribing patterns of statins. However, there's a huge chorus of people who are saying we have to give fewer statins. Statins are a $13 billion industry in the United States, and they are arguably the most overprescribed medication, possibly just secondary to the proton pump inhibitors, which are just terrible, terrible, terrible drugs that are so dangerous, and we just don't talk about it enough. So what do, right? We typically will look at an A1C, right? So we'll look at an A1C, which measures the average amount of your blood glucose over the past 3 months. That's our most common diagnostic tool for diabetes. A1Cs that are below 5.7 are considered normal. Prediabetes is 5.7 to 6.4, and diabetes diagnostic criteria is at 6.5 or above. Here's the thing. We need to get more sophisticated about the labs that we're asking for to help us to manage diabetes, okay? Because if you have an A1C of 5.7, 5.8, whatever it is, you are well down the path of going towards diabetes. What we actually need to be screening for is a fasting insulin level, because your fasting insulin level will be elevated 5, 10, 15 years before you ever have a high A1C, right? So we need to be aware of what is our fasting insulin levels, not just what is the A1C. The A1C is so far down the line. So diabetes in functional medicine is this spectrum, right? You're either walking towards diabetes or you're walking away from diabetes, which is what we're going to talk about next. How do we actually teach patients to reverse diabetes, right? Because unfortunately, because of the industrial influence over the production of guidelines, we know that even the American Diabetes Association recommends foods that are known to cause diabetes. It's a train wreck, okay? And that is because it's not just the pharmaceutical industry that has purchased the agencies that create these guidelines. It's also big agra, right? And one of the biggest influencers of big agra is the meat industry and the sugar industry. And I get it. Meat is undeniably delicious. It also increases inflammation, and it also increases the occurrence of a really dangerous compound called TMAO. And TMAO basically starts a cascade of inflammation throughout your entire body. Okay. It starts that cascade of inflammation throughout your entire body. We also know that we as Americans consume an outrageous amount of sugar. We consume an outrageous amount of sugar, and it is by design, right? You can listen to a podcast called Big Sugar that goes through the political history of sugar manufacturing in this country, and it will turn you off forever from eating sugar. And if you've ever read The Triumph of Doubt by David Michaels, there's an entire chapter about how industry has created doubt about if sugar is dangerous or if it is not. It's absurd to say that sugar is not dangerous, but Big Tobacco wrote the playbook. Big Sugar duplicated their methods, as did like the NFL as it relates to concussions. Sow seeds of doubt so that you can create consumer behaviors. How many of you remember the fat-free 80s, right? In the early 90s, when everything was low fat, no fat. What happened is that we got acutely trained in our palates to crave sugar. And diabetes is not necessarily a sugar disease. It is a fat and sugar disease. So it's these low quality fats as well as the consumption of sugar that can lead to diabetes. I mean, it's insane today that we look at processed foods as the norm. And when people are eating a plant-based whole foods diet with minimal meat, it's considered a trendy fad diet. Guys, we know what we need to be doing, right? We know what we need to be doing. In functional medicine, there are only 8 root causes of disease, and we know what we need to be doing. It's just we're obstinate and we don't want to go to sleep on time, and we don't want to stress less, and we don't want to avoid toxins and toxicants. We don't want to cut out allergenic foods from our diets. Okay. So we know that we have to get better at testing earlier. So I mentioned a fasting insulin level. Another thing that is super powerful that we need to be looking at is uric acid. High uric acid levels will predate cardiometabolic disease for years and years and years before having actual diabetes. All right. So we need to look at all of those things as well. You can look at a serum creatinine. We need to be looking at kidney dysfunction. We also can look at a look at our liver enzymes, our ALTs and ASTs, that can be linked to higher risk with taking the medications that are used to treat diabetes. And they also can indicate a fatty liver component. Okay. We also know that things like low vitamin D levels can lead to all kinds of problems. You can actually measure TMAO, like I mentioned earlier, because high levels of TMAO really increase the risk of heart disease. We also, of course, are going to look at a fasting glucose. Fasting glucose can be used very easily. We also have seen an explosion of continuous glucose monitoring, which I highly recommend for any of you who are here who are saying, you know, hey, I have diabetes. Get a continuous glucose monitor. Simple device, just installs in the back of your arm, relatively pain-free, implants a sensor into your arm that senses glucose. Because here's the thing, you may be eating in a way that you go, oh, this is so healthy. This is the way I'm supposed to be eating. And what may happen is you think like, oh, my acai smoothie is so healthy for me. But what you don't know is that it's actually spiking your blood sugar, right? You may eat a banana and think that you're doing something healthy. And in you, that may cause a spike in blood sugar. Okay. And so it's like we have to look at individuality and not just like everybody doing the same thing. Okay. So look at a continuous glucose monitor, not just a fasting glucose. We also look at postprandial glucose measures. So that's 2 hours after you've eaten, you look at where your glucose level is. That can be an indicator that you need additional support at meals or that you're overeating carbs at those meals. Okay. So those are some additional tests that we can look at. You also have to be very cautious when you're looking at A1Cs. When you have conditions that require dialysis or erythropoietin, it can change your A1C levels, right? So you may be looking at a falsely elevated or a falsely deflated A1C. This can also happen after blood transfusion. So you're taking a blood transfusion from someone else, that's going to change your A1C level. False A1Cs can also be triggered by kidney failure or by liver disease. Sickle cell anemia, thalassemia can all change A1Cs. So just be sure that you're looking clearly at what are all of the other factors that could be playing into this, right? A1Cs are not super precise either, right? So an A1C of 6.8 can actually range from 6.4 to 7.2 in the same blood sample. So we need a better test for A1C, which is why we also need to be looking at fasting insulins as well as continuous glucose monitoring to see where we are. All right, let's talk about what are some things that can help to reverse diabetes. Okay. Well, the first and foremost is the diet, right? Diabetes is ultimately a dietary disease. Okay. And so we have to look at what is the way that we can eat better. So the very baseline quintessential starting place for almost every single functional medicine patient is an elimination diet. And elimination diets can be done in a lot of ways, right? We can look at there's a ton of them. Like you can look at a Mediterranean diet. You can look at the DASH diet. You can look at what is, in my opinion, one of the more strict elimination diets, which is wheat-free, sugar-free, caffeine-free, alcohol-free, and totally plant-based. It's not always sustainable forever, but you get 3 weeks of that under your belt, you're going to be feeling better and your blood sugar is going to plummet. It is going to plummet. And so for those of you that are on the call today who have diabetes, I just encourage you. I know that food is delicious. I get it. However, you can reverse your diabetes, and you can reverse your risk of heart attack and stroke and kidney disease and eye problems and periodontal disease and nerve damage and foot ulcers and all of the things that come along with diabetes. In general, you guys know this list, right? Fried foods, saturated fats, trans fats, really concentrated sodium in foods. And I'm not talking about salting your food, right? I mean, a lot of people, when they go on elimination diets, they're like, I can't eat this way because the food is bland. Your food does not need to be bland, right? Salting your food that you are cooking at home is a dramatically different thing than getting highly processed food from the grocery store. Okay. So don't be afraid to salt your food, and also be aware salt substitutes cannot be used in patients who have diabetes who are taking ACE inhibitors or ARBs, because they tend to have a lot of potassium and they increase the risk of hyperkalemia. Concentrated sweets, baked goods, candies, ice creams, bagels are one of the worst things that you can possibly eat. Fruit juices, regular sodas, regular energy drinks, diet sodas increase the risk of diabetes. So we've got to get to a point when we eat real foods. Okay. So the CDC recommends developing some kind of eating plan. All right. So which diet do I want you to go on? The one that you'll stick to. Okay. In general, the most information that we have is about the Mediterranean diet, where we're eating, whole foods, non-starchy vegetables, a lean protein, small amounts of carbs, not going over the top with portion sizes, etc. So there's plenty of diets that can be implemented, but it's got to be one that you will absolutely stick to. So like I said, whole foods, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, fish, and then a ton of extra virgin olive oil is like the cornerstone of the Mediterranean diet. If you implement a mostly plant-based, mostly whole foods, minimal meat diet, and you exercise daily, you're going to be walking away from diabetes. All right, so let's talk about some medications, and I want to specifically talk first about insulins. Okay, so there's two different kinds of insulins out there. There are the recombinant insulins, and then there are the insulin analogs. Okay, so recombinant insulins are older, they are cheap, they are safe, they are effective. Okay, the newer insulin analogs, such as insulin aspart, insulin lispro, insulin glulicine, even the longer acting insulins like glargine and dedamer, those are the newer insulin analogs. All right. There are also pre-mixed versions of insulin, so you can have a short acting and a long acting put together, etc. So here's the thing. Recombinant insulins had been used for a long time. And so recombinant insulins, like I said, they're old and they're cheap. Okay. Well, drug companies don't like old and cheap drugs. They like new and expensive drugs. So what happened is the drug companies come out with these insulin analogs where they basically tack on extra stuff to insulin to make their half-lives variable. So some are longer acting, some are shorter acting. Okay. And they then go and send drug reps to all the docs and say, hey, recombinant insulin is a thing of the past. It's an animal-based product, and so it's more allergenic, and it's more likely to cause hypoglycemia compared to these insulin analogs. Okay, prescribe the insulin analogs now. The problem is they didn't have any data to support that. There's no data to show that recombinant insulins are any less safe and effective than the insulin analogs. A lot of patients cannot afford their insulin. Insulin pricing has skyrocketed over the past 15 to 20 years because we are the only developed nation, wealthy nation in the world that does not have governmental oversight over drug pricing. So drug companies can charge whatever they want. So if you have a patient who is skimping on their insulin, or if they can't afford their insulin, ask the question, are they on a recombinant insulin or an insulin analog? Because you can save that patient thousands of dollars per year if you can work to convince the prescriber that they can simply be on the insulin, the recombinant insulins, okay? There's also a newer drug called pramlintide that is a different class. It's called an amylinomimetic drug. And these drugs are used before meals. And the way that it works is by delaying the time that your stomach takes to empty itself. And it helps to reduce the secretion of glucagon after meals. So insulin and glucagon are opposite of one another. Insulin reduces blood sugar, glucagon increases blood sugar. The problem I have with pramlintide is that gastroparesis is a symptom of diabetes, and it is a consequence of diabetes as well. So if you have somebody that it already has this delayed gastric emptying, pramlintide is not the drug for them. Both people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes can use insulins, right? Typically, people with type 2 diabetes will start with an oral medication. The most common of the oral medications is metformin. Metformin is almost always the first starting point for patients with diabetes. It can be combined with lots and lots and lots of other drugs. It is a relatively safe drug. It's interesting, we don't exactly know how metformin works, but it works at the level of the liver, and it affects how much glucose your liver can make. It also decreases the amount of glucose absorption in the intestines, and it also helps at the level of the muscle to help your body absorb glucose and make your body more sensitive to insulin. I'm telling you right now, you start lifting weights, you're going to start reversing your diabetes because muscles can absorb so much insulin, okay? Metformin can be combined with basically any other medicine that is out there. We have our older medications, which are your alpha glucosidase inhibitors. These medications help your body to break down starchy foods. It helps them to break down table sugar. They act inside of the intestines, and so they tend to not cause hypoglycemia. The problem with these meds is that they cause so much gas and so much like abdominal cramping, and patients just hate taking them, right? These are the acarboses, the miglitols of the world. Patients absolutely hate taking them because they have such a strong side effect profile. Patients are, I mean, you guys, can we just talk about the GLP-1 receptor agonists right now? The Trulicities, the Byettas, the Ozempics, the Monaros that are just all over the news. How did they get all over the news? Big Pharma purchased the media, right? So right now, these GLP-1 receptor agonists, interestingly, drug history, the first of the GLP-1 receptor agonist to ever be brought to market was exenatide. And the way that exenatide was created was there were scientists that noticed that there were these lizards, these Gila monsters, that could go weeks and weeks without eating. And they tried to figure out how do they do this and maintain their normal body weight. So they studied the saliva of Gila monsters and extracted something very similar to exenatide, which then got synthesized and brought to market as the world's first GLP-1 receptor agonists. And the way that they work is that they're similar to what they extracted out of the Gila monster saliva, which is called incretin. And incretin helps to promote better glycemic control. So these GLP-1 agonists increase the amount of insulin that your body makes. This is a problem because people who have type 2 diabetes are already bathed in hyperinsulinemia. Giving more insulin to someone with type 2 diabetes is not a great solution. The problem is patients love them because they tend to cause some weight loss, right? They slow stomach emptying, helping you to maximize the nutrient absorption while also helping to lose weight. The problem is we know that gastroparesis is a problem in patients with diabetes, as is hyperinsulinemia. So this is a 1-2 punch of a not great way to treat diabetes, right? We also know that there are many a lawsuit out there at the moment because there are tons of people getting prescribed Ozempic and Monaro because it has been so popularized. We also know that the weight loss that is caused by these drugs, it's not good weight loss. What does it do? It causes you to lose muscle, and when you lose muscle, you are missing the boat on the treatment of diabetes. You are missing the boat because you have too little muscle to uptake the insulin. All right. So we also know that these medications can cause gastroparesis. It is a known side effect of the use of the medication. So delayed gastric emptying, gastroparesis, it stops or slows the movement of food from your stomach to your small intestines. Can it help to lower your blood sugar? Sure. So can working out, so can changing your diet, so can stressing less, all of the things. And so we have to be on the lookout for gastroparesis. We also need to understand that you are going to have muscle wasting. There is also what's called Ozempic face, where you lose so much fat in your face that you become very gaunt looking, which is not great either. And that's because you're losing fat mass in a lot of places where you actually want fat mass, and you're losing muscle mass in all the places that you want to have muscle mass. Here's another thing too. As soon as you stop taking that medication, all of the weight loss is going to come straight back. Okay. So we need to be cautious with the overprescribing of these GLP-1 agonists. And because so many people who do not have diabetes are getting prescribed the GLP-1 agonists, you increase the risk of patients with diabetes not being able to have access to their medications, because drug shortages are a thing, right? And we got to volley around drug shortages a lot. And the 4th largest manufacturer of generic medications in the United States was just shut down by the DEA maybe like a month and a half ago, for questionable practices, which it's like, okay, the DEA only gets involved for a few of the questionable practices. Otherwise, if it were a sanitation issue, that would fall under the purview of the FDA, right? So be aware that drug shortages are here to stay for a long time, okay? So we also have a newer class of medications called the sodium glucose transporter 2 inhibitors. So the Sgl2 inhibitors prevent your kidneys from holding on to glucose. They actually help with glucose elimination through the urine. Problem is, when you eliminate more glucose through the urine, you are predisposing people to urinary tract infections, and urinary tract infections are a major cause of morbidity in elderly patients. And they also are very not fun for younger people because they are painful. They, you know, I mean, everybody, pretty much everybody, especially every woman, has had a urinary tract infection at some point in time because the urethra of women is so much shorter than men. And so if you're predisposed to urinary tract infections, the canagliflozin, dapagliflozin, empagliflozin, or tugliflozin, none of those drugs are going to be where you want to start. They are safe in combination with metformin. And so you just need to be cautious, like which med are you choosing for each specific patient. Older class of medications, the sulfonylureas, these are some of the oldest meds. These are the glipizide, the glimepirides, the glypirides that are out there. These stimulate the production of insulin. Not good, because when you stimulate the production of insulin, you're worsening the disease process and increasing the risk of hypoglycemia. So this is one of the most common drugs to cause hypoglycemia. The thiazolidine diones decrease the amount of glucose in your liver, and they help your fat cells to use insulin more effectively. So the pioglitazone and rosiglitazone are your two TZD drugs, and they are very, very commonly prescribed as well. Another newer class of medications are your DPP4 inhibitors, your dipeptidyl peptidase. So you're inhibiting an enzyme. This enzyme breaks down incretin. So going back to our GLP-1 agonists, which kind of act like incretin, incretin helps your body to produce insulin when it's needed. And incretins also decrease glucose output from the liver when your body doesn't need it. They also help the body to make more insulin, which I think I've hammered enough as part of the root cause of what's causing the insulin resistance in the first place. And so we have to come to a point where we just say it's diet and exercise and sleep and stress and alcohol. And like, do you want to walk away from diabetes or do you want to walk towards it? Because using meds like these are your DPP4 inhibitors or your gliptins, like the sitagliptin, saxagliptin, linagliptin. And so they can help, but they're also not solving the root cause. Very rare do we see bromocriptine used, but it can help with insulin resistance as well. And so can we reverse type 2 diabetes? Absolutely. A lower calorie diet, having excellent physical exercise, and doing intermittent fasting can also really help. Western modern medicine tells you that type 2 diabetes is not reversible, and they are wrong. They're absolutely wrong. You do 6 weeks of an elimination diet. Do 3 weeks. Do 1 day, and your blood sugar is going to improve, right? We also, there was outrage a few months ago that the ADA came out and said, you know what, just give the kids the bariatric surgery. Bariatric surgery, I mean, I am a no elective surgeries ever kind of person. Gastric bypass, gastric sleeves, can they cause weight loss and can they improve diabetes? Yes. They also cause tons of nutritional deficits. They can lead to malnutrition. There's a lot that goes into, there's a lot of things that would make me say like no to bariatric surgery. Stem cells are on the horizon. Islet cell transplants are also on the horizon. Some people can do pancreatic transplants, can help as well. There's no magic pill. A ton of people will use supplements like berberine, cinnamon bark extract can also help with diabetes. And it's all really comes down to the entire lifestyle. So there you have it. A little crash course in diabetes meds and how can we diagnose it, treat it, look out for it, and hopefully reverse it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I can't remember all of the drug names. I can't remember any of the drug names. It's just amazing to me how you rattle them off, and not just the names, but what they do. And it's so impressive. I really am so thankful, Dr. Elmore, for you doing this for us again. Our survey, I'll read again for those of you who need the link. It's https://www.surveymonkey.com/lowercase r/ all uppercase letters LB as in boy 9L5 Z as in zoo, and the password is insulin with a capital I, lowercase NSULIN. Insulin is our password. Ms. Wright says it was very helpful. Ms. Lawson, wow, amazing, fantastic, says Mr. Leslie. Wow, thank you so much. I'm going to watch the recording. And I think y'all, I'm glad you brought that up, Ms. Reddick. So this will be on our website at carepatrol.com/advisors/Sean-Barnes, or on YouTube. If you search Sean Barnes Care Patrol, once you are on YouTube, you will find this and other recordings that you can watch or rewatch for credit, as well as for the information. Thank you again, Dr. Elmore. Do you have any last words for us today?
No, just thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I very much appreciate it. Thank you all for being here. I hope you have a great week, and look for our calendar coming out for September soon. Dr. Elmore, you may be asked again. We'll see if you'll do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.